Melissa mentioned that 90-day reprieve. Now, ASEAN countries did get that 90 days, but China did not, and is urging the U.S. to meet it halfway amid the spiraling trade war between these two economies. Beijing repeating that it will, quote, fight to the end if a deal cannot be reached with Washington.
美方仍在对中国滥施关税，对这种霸道霸凌的行径，中方坚决反对，绝不接受。施压、威胁和讹诈不是同中方打交道的正确方式。美方如果真的想谈，就应该拿出平等、尊重、互惠的态度。如果美方置两国和国际社会的利益于不顾，执意打关税战、贸易战，中方必将奉陪到底。
Well, the Foreign Ministry adding that while China is not interested in a fight, it's also not afraid of more tariffs. Beijing also warning that U.S. President Donald Trump's tariffs, quote, go against the entire world, given the damage that they will do to trading systems and the threat they pose to the stability of the global economic order. Donald Trump, though, hinting earlier that he would be open to talks with his Chinese counterpart after Washington slapped Beijing with more tariffs, bringing that to a cumulative total of 125%. And more, let's bring in Tan Sihui. She's live from Beijing, and Nick Harper in Washington, D.C. Sihui, let's start with you. China's response, we heard from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs there. It is, what else has it said to these tariffs from Washington?
Well, it appears that China has refrained from slapping even more tariffs following the decision to hike the tariffs by the U.S. to about 125%. And analysts are saying that it could possibly be that Chinese policymakers are split on the decision whether or not to make further tariff hikes, and possibly even Chinese President Xi Jinping himself has not come to a decision. Nevertheless, we heard strong words at the Foreign Affairs Ministry press conference. Again, the usual words: trade wars produce no winners and they will fight to the very end. But we've heard that they will not flinch from any further tariff hikes, and that there is no fear in an escalation of the trade war. Already, China has announced that it will moderately reduce the number of American films coming into China. The Commerce Ministry has also said that it is confident of its foreign trade. But nevertheless, the 125% tariff will effectively deal a huge blow to the Chinese economy, as according to economists, this 125% tariff is effectively an embargo on Chinese goods entering the U.S. And so that's why China is positioned to decisively fight back. And while China is likely to maintain its around 5% growth target, economists are saying that they could mildly downward adjust its implicit growth target to between 4 to 4.5%. And it's likely going to communicate more effectively with its domestic audience for a post-decoupling reality. But nevertheless, even though it does not want to back down, the dialogue between U.S. and China is still open as long as there is fair dialogue on an equal basis, according to China.
All right, so Sihui, China there striking a balance between saying it can fight, but rather it would prefer not to fight, and it can talk. But the U.S. side must offer some kind of halfway compromise. So it's putting itself in position for a hit back should it need to. If that happens, and you've already hinted it's unlikely at this stage, how calibrated is any retaliation from Beijing at this point? What kind of moves are we likely to see?
Well, uncertainty is still the word of the day. Well, according to American Chamber of Commerce here in China, which has about 800 companies, which oversees around 800 member companies, well, they say they're closely monitoring the situation, and they say that the current measures, they can't see how it's going to benefit the consumers in the short run or in the long run. And what we do know is that any further tariff hikes, it's not going to be any more meaningful, as the damage at a certain point, there's not going to be more damage to exporters, and importers are the ones going to be bearing more of the burden, and these costs are going to fall on the consumers. And so what we might see and what we're hoping to see is that all sides come to the negotiating table. But again, that remains unclear. What might happen is that if economic pressure ratchets up, that may force all parties to come to the negotiating table. But analysts are saying that there may be a need for a third party to mediate the situation, and then that will happen to produce a preliminary agreement.
Also, so of course, Beijing possibly recognizing it is at a point of diminishing returns in terms of hiking any more tariffs on U.S. imports. Tan Si-hui, they're reporting live from Beijing. And Nick Harper joins us now. Nick, we heard from Si-hui there. Mr. Trump might be hoping for some kind of communication from his Chinese counterpart, but President Xi will be expecting something in return from Washington should China give any concessions. Can Mr. Trump offer anything at this point?
Well, that's right, Wei Su. There's a vast difference between hope and reality. Donald Trump is hoping for talks, is hoping for a meeting with President Xi. But the reality of that is not yet clear. And as we heard just a moment ago, there's uncertainty, that being the word of the day. In China, this side of the world, there's plenty of uncertainty as well, because even though Donald Trump on Wednesday talked about this desire to get to the negotiating table with China, we've heard in the last few minutes from the White House economic advisor, Kevin Hassett. He's told CNBC that conversations on China have not yet begun. So we are at this stage of essentially being in an economic standoff. Both sides have significantly ratcheted up their tariffs at a time when it's unclear if they are willing to speak. It may be that China decides to tough this one out and wait for the first play from the United States, especially as we've seen over the last 24 hours a weakening of position from the US in relation to other countries, the US rolling back those reciprocal tariffs on all other countries. So it's unclear exactly what Donald Trump might be looking to offer. Remember that China is the United States' third largest trading partner. Last year, about $450 billion worth of Chinese goods were imported into the United States. So there will be an impact on the costs for consumers. And then farmers in the US export vast amounts of agricultural products to China. They will be hit as well with this ongoing trade dispute.
So, Nick, not clear what Mr. Trump can offer Mr. Xi. Also not clear, even in retrospect, what might have been behind that 90-day reprieve that other countries, every other country but China, got in terms of those reciprocal tariffs. The Trump administration hinting that there's a larger plan to this, but it's uncertain. What explains this sudden pause on tariffs?
Well, really, I think a lot of it has to do with that considerable concern that the White House suddenly had about what the effects of all of this was having on global stock markets and the US bond market. Since Thursday last week, we saw global markets drop. And then by the time we got to the weekend, we're told that the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, was speaking to Donald Trump. He travelled down to Mar-a-Lago to meet with the president, came back to Washington with him on Air Force One, really trying to push the president to set out some sort of endgame, an endgame that would reassure global markets and try to push this idea of negotiating deals with countries. Now, it still took a couple of days until Wednesday for that plan to fully come together, but that was the idea that we're now hearing was very much behind part of this push. But I think in some respects, the damage has already been done. Wall Street, although it had a big rally on Wednesday, is still down 4% compared to this time last week. And there's probably damage having been done to the US's reputation with all of these trade partners around the world. We've seen Donald Trump being able to change his trade policy on a whim with a social media post. And I think all of these countries who are now coming to negotiate with the United States will be wary that things could change very quickly again in the future.
Oh, thanks. Nick Harper there, live from Washington, D.C., and Tan Si-hui from Beijing.